What if the cloth that wrapped Jesus Christ's body still holds his DNA? And what if that DNA pointed somewhere nobody expected? It does reveal how deeply intertwined the fabric is with human history and devotion. Its story is less about divine proof and more about how relics travel through time, carrying pieces of everyone who ever touched them. That's exactly the question exploding across social media right now, after a new scientific study dropped a bombshell finding about the Shroud of Turin. But here's the thing. The real story is far more fascinating and far more complicated than the headlines are letting on. Let's break it all down. Before we get into the DNA, let's establish what we're even talking about. The Shroud of Turin is a 4.4-meter-long linen cloth, roughly the size of a large bedsheet, currently housed in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, Italy. On it, a faint, almost photographic image of a man, a face, hands, a body. Many Christians believe this is the burial cloth of Jesus Christ, the cloth that wrapped him after the crucifixion. It's one of the most studied, most debated, and most controversial objects in human history. The first historical record of the shroud dates back to 1354 in France, but believers argue it's nearly 2,000 years old, dating to the time of Jesus himself. Scientists, on the other hand, have long been skeptical. A famous 1989 radiocarbon dating study placed its origin somewhere between 1260 and 1390 CE, smack in the Middle Ages. But that conclusion has been challenged, and the debate has never fully settled. Now, in 2026, a new study has added a whole new dimension to the mystery. Researchers led by Gianni Barcaccia at the University of Padova in Italy have published a new analysis of the shroud, and it's unlike anything done before. Here's the key detail. They didn't create new samples. They reanalyzed 12 samples that were collected way back in 1978, when the Vatican officially allowed researchers access to the cloth. Using a technique called next-generation sequencing, they extracted and analyzed microscopic traces of DNA from the linen fibers. And what they found was a lot of DNA from a lot of different places. Human DNA, microbial DNA, plant DNA, animal DNA. We're talking traces from humans, bacteria, fungi, red coral from the Mediterranean, domesticated animals like cattle, pigs, chickens, dogs, and cats, even DNA from plants like carrots, wheat, corn, bananas, and peanuts. Now here's where it gets really interesting. Of the human DNA on the cloth, the researchers identified at least 14 different individuals from very different parts of the world. About 55% of the human DNA corresponded to lineages from the Near East. But 38.7%, nearly 40%, was linked to Indian lineages. That number sent the internet into a full meltdown. Within days of the study appearing online, social media was on fire. Questions like, do 2 billion Christians actually worship an Indian? And did Jesus come from India? Were trending across different social media platforms. And honestly, you can understand why people reacted that way. The idea that physical evidence on the supposed burial cloth of Jesus might challenge fundamental assumptions about his identity. But here's where we need to pump the brakes, because the science tells a very different story. The researchers themselves were careful to explain what the Indian DNA actually means and what it doesn't mean. The cloth, whatever its true origin, has been touched by hundreds, possibly thousands, of people over many centuries. Pilgrims, priests, researchers, royals, traders. Every single one of them left microscopic traces behind. So when scientists find Indian DNA on the shroud, it doesn't mean Jesus was from India. It most likely means the cloth either came into contact with people of Indian origin through ancient trade routes, or, and this is the researchers' leading theory, the linen yarn itself may have been manufactured in the Indus Valley region and imported into the Mediterranean. Think about it. Ancient trade between India and the Mediterranean was extensive. Spices, textiles, and materials moved across these routes for centuries. In fact, the plant DNA on the shroud tells a similar story. Traces from South America were also found, which couldn't have existed at the time of Jesus, since Columbus didn't reach the Americas until the 15th century. This tells us the cloth was being handled and contaminated right up through modern times. One of the most striking findings from the study, a DNA lineage called K1AB1A, one of the strongest human DNA signals on the cloth, was matched to the official sample collector from 1978 himself. In other words, even the most prominent DNA signature came from a modern researcher. The study's own conclusion is remarkably humble. It says, "Our findings illuminate important aspects of the Shroud's preservation history." That's it. No grand claims. No miracles confirmed or denied. The DNA doesn't tell us who the Shroud belonged to. It tells us everywhere the Shroud has been. Here's the fundamental scientific problem. Even if Jesus did exist and left biological material behind, and there are researchers actively looking, we have no baseline DNA to compare it to. You can't run a test, get a DNA sequence, and say, "This is the DNA of Jesus Christ," because you'd have nothing to compare it against. Some scientists are studying the James ossuary, a first-century chalk box believed by some to have held the bones of Jesus' brother James. Others are analyzing alleged relics of John the Baptist, who would have shared DNA with Jesus as his cousin. But as of right now, the science is fascinating. The mystery is real. The headlines are overblown. The Shroud of Turin remains exactly what it's always been, one of history's greatest unsolved puzzles. This new DNA study doesn't prove it's real. It doesn't prove it's fake. But it does reveal something remarkable. This cloth has been touched by people from across the ancient world. From the Near East, from India, from Europe. Whatever it is, it's been everywhere. And maybe that's the point. Some questions are meant to remain unanswered, fueling curiosity. If you found this breakdown helpful, drop a like and subscribe. We cover science, history, and the stories behind the headlines every week. Leave a comment. Do you think the Shroud is authentic? Let's talk about it below.